Good morning everyone, welcome back to the workshop and another Sunday video. So it's a Sunday after the 5-day sash restoration course. You can see I'm in the process of tidying up. I've done this end of the workshop. We did this for some photos while the photographer was here. And I've got to sort out that end. Now I've got to sort all these tools out and what have you. I just wanted to briefly show you this wonderful window that has been done by the students on the course. At the minute it's on a bench that's a bit wonky, so the top, at the minute this is sitting a bit shy here, so it's shoving right up, but which makes it look a bit odd. But when I've had chances, some finishing work needed to this box, it was really loose, as boxes go, and that's why I haven't yet had them put the staff beads in and things. And we've added this strip here, which needs fixing in. We've just knocked it in for now. So yeah, I need to get this all organised and tidy all that up in there. But what a lovely little window this is now. See there the weights. And we had to use modern lead bar because we couldn't. I don't have the original cast weights for this window, but how glorious is that? So that brings me on nicely to the subject of today's video, which are these planes here. And these are the only examples of planes of this type that I own. So this one here, you can see on all the others, I have two wedges, with the exception of this one here. Okay, so this one's missing its front wedge and its nicker. If you notice, the iron sits on the raised fence, as it were. If it was a rebate plane, the iron would be in here and would be cutting here. This one's had various strips nailed in it over the years, pinned in it, which is quite common on these old planes. You would just pin a strip in, so you can see the amount of pinholes it's had, and that's to lower or to reduce the depth of the groove that it's cutting. So these are what's called Dado planes. Okay, so if we look at this one, it has a depth stop. So this one is adjustable and has a depth stop because it's wider, it has a chunkier body, and probably was a more expensive plane than this one. But it has this characteristic 2-iron nicker and an iron that sits skewed to the cut. And they also have these characteristic big mouth openings to let the shavings out. And the purpose of a dado plane is literally to cut a housing or a groove across the grain of a board. More commonly used in furniture, which is why I don't use mine very often. But I'm going to show you an example today of where we could use a dado plane in window making. But first of all, I want to have a quick look at these planes. I brought most of these as one job lot from the same place. Most of them have the name W.M. Howard on them. There's one or two. Put that one back in as well. So that's a Howard. That's a Howard. That one I'm not sure about. This one isn't a Howard. That's a Howard, and that's a Howard, and that's a Howard. So I've brought pretty much one joiner's set of dado planes, and then there's been one or two that have popped up since. So I brought these from a house clearance shop in Birmingham, and interestingly, the ones that are stamped with a maker's mark, this one's an E. Preston, which is a Birmingham maker, and this one is a Routledge, which as you can see there, made in Bull Street in Birmingham. After this week's antics, Bull Street in Birmingham probably is known for another reason. Those of you who are local will see the news and know that. So it's just interesting that these planes have never moved very far from their place of making and probably place of using for their entire careers. These are some of the best preserved planes I've got. because even in the furniture world, they probably weren't used that often. Um, Unless you're doing bookcases and that sort of thing, and you're grooving shelves in, you don't really use a dado plane that often. So I would say they're not essential. I only have these because they came up. I had a friend working in a house clearance shop in Birmingham who gave me the tip off. They got some wooden planes there um, that looked like moulding planes, and I turned up and they were these, and yeah, I couldn't resist, so I brought them. And as you can see from the irons in certainly particularly this iron, I've never used them. You know, I've used one, I think, once. But what I want to look at today is how we could use a dado plane to produce some of the joints in a sash window. Now, I don't think they did use dado planes because they're not quick. No, it's not that they're not quick, it's that they're not as quick as other methods to produce the same result. However, we could use a dado plane in a sash. So if we look here, this is one of my teaching pieces. So this is a section of a quite high status Victorian window, Victorian box sash, and it's a high status window and has all these tongues and grooves on its components. So we'll just have a look around here. You can see there's a groove that the board sits over, and there's a tongue that sits in it. There's also on these, so it's all tied up together as a bunch now for moving around. But there's a groove here also and a groove here. So this is this outer lining from the head of this window, or part of it from the head of this window, and it would have had a groove on the outside as well for the jam lining boards. But where we could use a dado plane in this situation is for this little joint here. So this is the headboard of the box. You see here it's quite chunky. We'd have used a standard filister and we'd have taken all these out and played all these grooves. But here we have this interesting housing, or dado as they're also known. Now this one was definitely sawn because you can see where the maker undercut it. And they could still be sawn, and you could use your dado plane just to knock them off to depth. But you could actually use a dado to cut the whole groove if you wanted. So in a moment, I'll get you on the tripod and we'll look at examples of that and how the plane could be used. I'm not saying they did use dados at all, because 90% of the ones I find, even on these high status windows, you can find evidence of other tools being used. So in this case, it's a saw. And I bet if we took this joint apart, if we pulled the nails out of here to hold it together, we would find that these housings were knocked out with a hammer and chisel. Usually quite crudely, I have to say. Even in high status windows like this, some of this joint work is really crude because you can't see the inside face, you can only see this outside face. So as long as this joint here was crisp, these guys never pretended to matter what the rest was like. We now apply the furniture makers talk to architectural joinery, and in doing so, we do very much overcomplicate how we produce things. And when you, like I say, when you start to look at historical pieces like this, you almost always find work like this where there's an overcut, or like here, the board was split when they nailed in this lining that went this way, you know, because they banged two nails in together, and they're quite chunky nails. That's split the top corner off. This window here was actually damaged on one end with these nails that were then driven on top of the two nails that are holding the faces on. And these two big nails that were holding it in. On one end, I think it's the other end. Maybe this end. Yeah, it's this end. These big nails found the two nails that were holding the window together, so that splits like this are quite common. But yeah, we now see things. You know, only when you take historical work apart do you see things like this. So this is where this board has been ploughed with the plough plane. You see where it's run beautifully here. And then you get down here where the grain changes direction and there's tear out. But because there isn't any on this side of the board, which is the visible side of the board, that board was deemed acceptable and put into the window. That wouldn't necessarily be the case in modern work. We'd very likely reject this board now because we've got so used to machining, where a lot of cuts do come out absolutely perfectly. Our tolerance standards are a lot higher than often is the case with period work. So personally, I don't think they would have used a dado plane for this joint. However, I'm going to demonstrate how we would do this, because it's exactly the same to do this kind of joint as it would be to do, for example, a groove for a bookshelf or that sort of thing. A cabinet, if you're putting a shelf in a cabinet carcass, again, it can be done using the same method, using the dado planes. So we're going to look at that now. Put you on the tripod and we'll get set up and get a couple of grooves cut. So I've got my two setups now. I've got my batten nailed on with my square tidy as a setup there. I've set the plane up fairly roughly. So the first setup would just come straight in with the plane. And I've not set that plane up overly well because, again, it's not a plane I'm used to using. Your batten has to go to the right of the work because of where the depth stop and everything is on the left-hand side of the plane. Now, normally I would use a spelch board, but like I say, a dado is not something I use often, so it's not a plane I'm used to using, but that's what you get. The scribe cutters on this one could just do with being a bit tighter set, a bit better set. The other way I would use the dado plane is I would take the nose, the scribe cutter where I needed it, and I'd mark with my scribe cutter the width of the plane. I would then take two knife marks. So there was no knife marks on that at all. I would then take two knife marks with my gauge, with my square. Pop that off a second. And I would scribe two lines across like I've done there, which is what I've done here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to set this up. And this is the other way that you can use a dado plane, because you can use it very much like you would use hand router on the surface. And you can use it for getting to depth on a cut. So I've now established two good sides. I've not gone very deep with this because I actually don't is what I'm looking to do. If I was going to use a Dado plane as a router, I would work the same way as I would work with the router. I'd get almost to the bottom of my mark. But now you see I can come in with the Dado plane. And again, you should always have a spelch board with a Dado plane. You should have a piece of waste in here against your dogs that's the same thickness as this, so that you can work. But that is a much cleaner way of working, especially when the scribes on the Dado plane aren't brilliant. But this is just a very rough look at a type of plane that doesn't come up often in tutorials and that sort of thing. And as I say, I would normally have a piece like that on the back. If I was going to use a plane like this, I would always, because we're working through from one side, we're working across the grain and we're working through from one side, I would always make sure I'd got a piece and I'd stick it behind my dogs and then set my workpiece up the same way. But as you can see also, where I've not gone, so this first groove I did was a setup piece to get my scribes in the right place. And this little wedge that holds the scribes here just walked backwards because this is the first time this plane's been used in quite some time. So as you saw, it cut better on the second. That one's terrible because the scribes had walked out. The second one's better, but you've still got the breakout here. And this one is much better in that these are still square, but there is a little bit of breakout just a little bit lower down. But in this sort of situation, you could go almost to your finish with your hammer and chisel and your saw, and then you could just come back and you could just finish to depth because you've got this lovely depth stop on these planes. And that is how you could use the Dado plane to do the top corner joint as we showed earlier on a sash. This one's a 3/8. You'd probably want to use a 1/2 inch one, but my 1/2 inch one's not in a great state. I think that's the 1/2 inch. So yeah, it says 4/8. So obviously that's 1/2 inch. So this particular plane needs a lot more work than that one did because that one, the knickers were fairly sharp and the iron was in fairly good order. This iron has a big chip in it and needs a lot more work to get it going than that one. So that's why I've used 3/8. As I say, they're not a plane that I use often, so they're not a plane that I can sort of really talk to as to speed and efficiency, but they are a really good way of ploughing a beautiful flat bottom groove. So these grooves are, so the first groove I set up when I was setting the plane up is really ragged. That one's terrible. This one's better, but I just nailed the batten on. I didn't scribe this one at all. So this one that I've scribed is much better. But look, with all of them, look how flat bottomed and level these grooves are. So for me, this method of striking off and then using it more as a hand router is a vastly better way of using this plane efficiently. To create a beautiful flat bottomed housing joint. Okay, and you can see here, well, you can see here, see how the tear rate is much lower. That's because I did this corner up here. So these corners were done with the saw. And obviously, I've got terrible tear out here. But again, it's about having a spelch board. It's about thinking about your processes because you're cross graining. And for the first time in the planes that we've looked at thus far, we're beginning to cross-grain plane. When we come onto the panel planes, again, you need some way of controlling the breakout because you are trying to plane across the grain. So you're always going to get either tear up like this, or you're going to get breakout here with a cross-grain plane. Now, and it's the same with the panel raises and that sort of thing. So we have to use systems that mitigate this. This is one of those systems. Again, as I say, setting it up with a spelch board on the back, a breakout board on the back, is the other really good way to control that. Obviously, normally it would be of the same thickness. And I actually like to, if I've got a board, for example, this was a 5 1/4 board, for example, that will have come out a 6-inch stock. If you've dressed your side and your edge, when you rip off to dress the final edge, that piece there is perfect because it's the same thickness as this. That then becomes perfect for supporting and becoming your spouch board. And yeah, there's ways to make planes like this work really efficiently, and that's what we need to do. That's how we need to work, is quickly and efficiently, but simply. Because it's simple, you'll do it. If it isn't simple, you won't do it. So I hope that sort of whirlwind introduction to Dado Planes has been insightful and helpful. I am going to ask a question now. I'd like to know which planes you'd like to see next. I'd like everyone to drop in the comments below. I have everything from hollows and rounds and beading planes right through to big architectural mouldings for architraves. I've got all the window planes as well. If there's a specific plane you would like to see used, drop in the comments below and I'll try my best to make videos on that. I'll do the most popular suggestions first, probably. But yeah, get all your suggestions out there and we'll see what we can do about getting videos made regarding those planes, regarding how they're used, why they're used, and the mouldings they produce. And and it's a good excuse for a look through the planes I have of those types. So yeah, please do drop in the comments what you'd like to see. And I'll do my best to make videos accordingly. The new members, the video for the new memberships will go live today. And as always, if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, that would be wonderful because that really does help the YouTube algorithm and it's helping the channel to grow. And the more the channel grows, the more time I can put into making videos, and the more money I can put into kit to make videos, which will make it better for all of us. So for now, thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you on the next video.